Here we are. This is episode 1 of Radical Greatness. This is a series. I'm going to give some updates on Legendary Life Media, what we're doing, stuff like that. And of course, we're going to talk about everything that it takes to actually be great in life, whatever that means, right? So we're going to look at what that means and dig into ideas and concepts around this. And so I'm coming to you live from the apocalypse, if you will, the end of an age of the human potential movement. All of this personal development, the guru culture, the internet gurus, it's like all this stuff culminated from the 50s and the human potential movement and self-development and NLP and all these movements that were really geared towards becoming your best version. And that means a lot of different things, obviously, but ultimately the realm of personal development kind of culminated in the last, I'd say, 15 to 20 years into the space of the online guru, into the space of all sorts of wild and wacky things. And so here it is. We're just going to crack it open. This is the real deal, Holyfield. We're going to talk about all things human potential, achieving greatness, and battling the world as it is today to achieve your goals and dreams. It's not by any means specific to self-help and personal development, but I also don't want to just talk about current events and dig into the distractions because, number one, I need these, but I'm going to take these off because they're fogging up. But here's the thing. Number one, we're kind of in this interesting place in time, this interesting time period, right? We are surrounded by distractions. You guys can turn on any media channel and hear about everything that's going on. And what we're doing here is distilling down the real, raw experience of someone who's alive today in 2026 with the knowledge and information that's there, that's been there, what's happened in society, what's transpired, what's happened in entrepreneurship, business, the human potential movement, self-development, and what's really happening today. This is kind of what inspired this particular crusade, if you will. I've been away for a while, not really shooting a ton of content because I've been busy with a whole bunch of other stuff and getting things organized and put in place. It's not really a good excuse, but because it doesn't take that much time to flip on a camera and talk if that's your thing. But look, here's the deal, guys. What is going on today? The idea is that we want to cut through the noise. You guys you can find current events and, spin yourself off into a tizzy just speculating about what's happening, what's going to happen, whatever is happening. The fact is that media and communications, the ability for one person to communicate to another person or many people, in a sense, the legacy media, we all kind of witness that die, in a sense. News that's informative, it's useful. It has, some value to understand what's happening. Really, the only value of the news media has always been, if you're talking about inherent value, is knowing whether or not you're going to die from a severe weather storm or, find out what's happening in the markets as a means for a very small percentage of the population who uses that information to invest or make business decisions and whatnot. The rest of it is really just a massive distraction, and it's really a waste of time, right? So I have not watched television for probably 20 years. I do own a TV, but it's rarely on, and if it is, I'm just using it to cast or maybe watch an occasional movie or something like that. But it is just really a waste of time. And, a long time ago, I thought about all these things that I've done, diving into self-development, personal growth. Really, all I wanted was to learn how to make money. And it's great to have a individual or specific drive for doing something, but I learned a whole lot more. So there's a tremendous amount of value in the realm of self-development and personal development. There's many layers that go into a variety of areas of life. So, when I started Legendary Life Media, it was this idea that we can bring creators together that are aligned with the core values and purpose of Legendary, which is all things that help people improve their life and showcase living a higher lifestyle than the average person. Because let's face it, in order to be that person, in most cases, you have to be somebody completely different, do something completely different than the masses are doing. In some cases, people get lucky and they're shoe-ins, or there's nepotism, and there's all these other ways that people get into high-paying positions and eventually build out a lifestyle that's, somewhat impressive to look at. But what I've found after 20 plus years in coaching and self-development and exploring get-rich-quick schemes on the internet and all these wild and wacky angles that you can take, there's been a lot of really useful and key takeaways, and a lot of the information that I have been discovering over these years it is quite fascinating. Look, COVID was a good example. COVID was forcing the world at large to wake up. There's this debate, right, about, trust the science, and there's kind of been this massive divisiveness in the political realm, right? And a lot of it has to do with, science versus faith and these types of things. And, what I've come to discover essentially is that every side of the story is partially correct. There is partial truth in many people's viewpoints and perspectives. However, at the same time, all of these viewpoints and perspectives, even backed by science, even backed by data, typically is either biased or missing a whole other part of the story, right? So, digging into the truth can feel quite subjective. And so really the point of this is, how do we take this information, this data that we have access to, and apply it to ourselves? How do we benefit from it, right? Because I can tell you, getting stuck in debate and getting stuck in, going down rabbit holes of conspiracy theories and, taking a very strong biased stance from one end to another on something, ultimately leads to a failure. Because if you close yourself off to the options of what the truth is or what's possible in life, you basically just start narrowing the options and possibilities in life, right? So a big part of this journey for me, well, really, let me go back to where it all really started. Because I don't know if you guys remember, when I was about 18 years old, there were these infomercials by Kevin Trudeau. And he was selling this book called Natural Cures They Don't Want You to Know About. And this book eventually led him to federal prison, by the way, which interestingly enough, it wasn't because he was trying to cure people. It was some FCC or FTC violation, something like that. It was like a technicality. But they obviously didn't want him sharing a lot of this information, because as valid as a lot of the claims are in the book, in my opinion, there's a lot of it that contests with the science, and there's a lot of it that contests with the power structure at large. So, the powers that be did not take kindly to that. But for me, it was a very eye-opening experience, because I was not somebody who was really dialed in as far as health goes. And here I am today. I've kind of come full circle because I've been reigniting that journey. But what was interesting is I started looking into this and thinking, okay, obviously this perspective, it's such a strong perspective biased against the mainstream narrative. And it was very interesting to me because it seemed to be true. It seemed that there was a lot of truth to it. And he was talking about how the food companies and the pharmaceutical companies were colluding to make people addicted to their food products, make people sick, and colluding with the health system. I was like, it all made perfect sense. And probably a good portion of what he's saying is true. Of course, these types of things it's very contextually based. It's very case by case basis, right? It's very dangerous to go down the road of just making generalities. And then not long after that, my girlfriend at the time got me into every sort of alternative healing, spiritual health therapy on the planet. Whatever we could find, we did it. And that led me to a life coaching program that was $8,000 when I had just graduated college. I was living with my parents, making like $40,000 a year. And I was like, something, it was divine intervention. It like forced me to go into this program and spend $8,000 that I didn't have and was making payments on it. This was like right before the market crash of '08. But that program just like really opened my eyes to, first of all, coaching from the standpoint of what is a way to actually help somebody overcome their problems and their traumas and their issues, or even what is a way to help somebody get better results than the standard or mainstream ways of doing things. And so it really opened my eyes in that sense. Now from where I sit today, a lot of that information, those ways of thinking, there was a big aspect of the program that was focused on executive coaching. And so I started to think differently in a way that really changed my life. And, it was a program to become a life coach, but I was like 21 years old. So what does a 21-year-old know about life, right? Virtually nothing. That being said, the information, the data, the knowledge, the questions, the way of thinking, the way of looking at things, the perspectives, everything that I was introduced to through that really set me up for success in other areas of life later down the road. And I'm really grateful that I went down that path. And later, as I started really looking into the source of all this alternative thought, right? First of all, alternative medicine is kind of in its own category, right? Because what we call alternative medicine, it really has been around for thousands of years. Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, herbalism, like this is just what our ancestors called medicine, right? That to me has always been fascinating. I've always been interested in, in that sort of thing. But that led me to looking at the coaching industry, and I've done all sorts of different coaching programs, self-development, and all sorts of things that really became interesting until I got to a certain point where it just caused me to question everything. Like, why are we really doing this? First of all, who's saying that we need to improve? Then there's kind of this existential battle, right? Of, I need to be better. We know that we can improve in whatever areas of life that we're really looking to make improvements in. We know that there's a way to improve, but then that kind of contests this idea that, well, we're already perfect, right? Like that narrative of, you're perfect, you're made in the image of God, everything, now I think these things coexist, right? Like these philosophies coexist because, first of all, I'm going to put the stunners back on. When it comes to business, sometimes you just got to pay the cost to be the boss. You know what I mean? I paid the cost to be the boss. That's just what it is. You got to cash out and go see the jeweler. Go check in with Johnny Dang. Once you start closing deals. But anyways, I knew that, okay, this stuff is all great, the coaching stuff, people pay for coaching. And then we saw this like meteoric rise of online coaches and gurus, get rich quick and all this sort of thing. I was always interested in real estate. Real estate's a hard asset. And, when the crash hit, I got involved in a real estate MLM, which honestly was one of the best things I guess you could say I did, because prior to that, I didn't have any real idea of what I wanted to do or any real direction. And the irony, of course, is to really take the action. It took me many years to have the mindset to actually take the action. And the mindset comes from the coaching or that self-inquiry and all of these alternate ways of thinking in the human potential movement. When I say human potential movement, let's back up real quick, because the human potential movement was, in the 50s and 60s, post-World War II, there were all these movements and all these like ideas. A lot of it came out of the hippie movement, free love and, peace and, transcendence and better yourself. And NLP had a big thing to do with it. There were a lot of cults that came out of like Hollywood and things like that had a lot to do with the amalgamation of this material and this information that had to do with you're not achieving success in your life because there's all these different things that you need to do and there's all these problems that you need to address. And, and there's some validity to it, just like, there is some validity to there's nothing wrong with you and you're perfect and you can just, kind of take the action and take the steps and move towards your goals instead of wasting your time, trying to figure out these theoretical things that are wrong with you and trying to fix things that can't really be fixed within a human being. And so that to me was instrumental, early in my real estate career. So a lot of people that were in this real estate MLM, a lot of them were part of Landmark. And if you guys know anything about Landmark, well, Landmark is a very interesting self-help program that a lot of interesting people. It's a very interesting experience to say. Now, they have a lot of really key points within Landmark, but their delivery, in my opinion, is just completely off. But the content or the narrative that's there is really useful in getting you to self-inquire as to why do bad things happen, or what things have happened that I can change, and what can I do to change myself, and all these things that allow an individual to start looking at their behavior and their actions and start taking responsibility. And of course, the more responsibility you take in life, the more results you're going to start to get, because you're going to stop giving away your power to other people by blaming them for things. And, so there's a lot of really powerful concepts in this world that spawned out of the human potential movement. And then, that was really big through the 70s and 80s and, 90s. And then, then we got the internet. And what happens when the internet enters the scene is now we have all this information, right? And of course, as you guys saw, there's no way to really always vet the information. Is it true or is it not? So there's a lot of interesting information, but the fact is there's plenty of information, all the knowledge. You can, if you don't know the answer to a question, you can look it up and generally get an answer. And, this transcended or transformed the environment for human beings in the last 20, 30 years, which is why I think, typically like Gen X millennials are probably the most intelligent species that have ever walked the planet. Before our current generation, Gen Z, they started assigning their brains away to like ChatGPT and started to lose brain processing power. So with the amalgamation of bringing in this information, this knowledge, and starting to look at all these spiritual practices and self-inquiry and, man, it's a lot to think about. And then, there's been this kind of revival into Christianity, and I've looked into a lot of like biblical wealth principles, and all these things have so many useful, valid perspectives, right? At the end of the day, what's the point of it, right? What's the point of it? And, in order to ask that question, really what you're asking is, what is it that you want to create with what's available? Right? Because if we're not asking ourselves that question, it's pretty much a pointless, philosophical debate. And we're not here to philosophize. I spent a lot of my years philosophizing, and, as interesting and fun and curious as that becomes, when it comes to being legendary and legendary life media, what I'm creating here is an actual channel to provide real, useful, applicable, actionable information, data based on our own research, based on, a modern landscape that gives you kind of the highest edge, right? Because what are we going to do when AI takes over, right? This is a big conversation right now, and I'm not suggesting to go down that rabbit hole, but what I can say for certain is that people worried about AI taking jobs, it's a valid concern, but at the same time, you should be looking at how do you acquire assets? How do you create assets? How do you make money with AI, right? Because that's going to be the biggest opportunity of the next probably 20, 30 years. And, it only takes so long to make to make the money that you need in order to cash out and go see Johnny Dang. You know what I'm saying? Got to go cash out and see Johnny Dang. Now, I do not condone buying jewelry, of course, unless it's gold. There is a use case for buying gold. But again, the problem with wearable assets is that you can lose them. Or they can be stolen, right? But look, what is all this leading to? Well, what this gives us is an opportunity to really look back at the last 20, 30, 50 years of human evolution, to look at the impacts of technology over that time, extract the best lessons from that timeline and apply it to now. Because what's in now is unlimited. We have no idea, right? Now, look, the doomsayers are always going to be in your ear, right? If you're on Twitter, if you're on YouTube, if you're on these social media platforms, somewhere, some way, the doomsayers will sneak in once or twice here and there. And the doomsayers, the message of the doomsayers is always, the world's going to end. There's going to be a blackout. The grid's going to go down. China's going to hack us. Iran's going to nuke the fucking world and nobody's going to exist. Listen, okay, that's great. If that happens, won't matter. So thinking about it is an absolute waste of time. And if history proves us right, look, all that is a fear harvesting ritual, right? So I highly recommend anyone listening to this, just stop giving your energy and attention to that entirely. That narrative, it hasn't come true in hundreds of years. People have been saying the apocalypse is coming and the end of the world is coming, and on and on, right? So don't give your energy and thought attention to that, right? It's wasted brain power to think or to entertain any of those narratives. When we think about a narrative, what is a narrative? This is like, why does legendary exist? Legendary exists based on the following narrative. The following narrative is you can be, do, or have anything that you want as long as you believe in yourself and take the action. That narrative is predicated on everything that you want in life, every experience that you want, all the money that you want, all the physical stuff that you want that's out there is already out there, right? And what does it take to draw the greatness out of you? What does it take to draw the strength and the stamina and the intelligence and the capability for going after your dreams, setting realistic and achievable goals, and actually getting after it and getting getting a chunk of the pie, right? Now, I'm not saying it's all about the money. This is why I talked about that holistic health piece, because your health is always going to be number one. Health is always going to be more important than money. You could have $1 billion in the bank. If you can't walk or breathe or, something like that, that money is pretty much useless. So let's get that straight. And, when we talk about the health stuff is like, look, this 2026, we are bombarded, and this is almost becoming mainstream because it's been going on for so long that we're bombarded by all these chemicals. There's chemicals in the water. Now people are starting to realize chemtrails was a conspiracy, but of course they've been doing that for more than 50 years. It's called stratospheric aerosol injections of barium and aluminum, weather modification. That stuff's been going on. The point is, glyphosate in the crops, genetically modified food, all the stuff, right? There's an all-on assault against our health. And so that's why I say this area, you've got to stay vigilant. Where I'm at is for a couple years, maybe longer, actually quite a few years, I was not staying vigilant. And then I ended up, overweight, really in a condition where I have to take some pretty extreme measures to reverse it. Now, luckily, I know what we're up against, right? Because we're up against a lot. You're up against your food and your water and the air, and there's 44,000 chemicals in use in commerce in America that are completely unregulated. VOCs, aerosols, 44,000, right? No, we have no idea what the impact of breathing these in or, having them in our environments really will do to us in the long run. But this is why I say health is always going to be the most important, and it's also the one where you have to be the most vigilant because unfortunately, that's just where we are. And so how did I get into this? How do we get into this conversation about health? Because we were talking about accomplishing your dreams, achieving whatever you want. So there's kind of like 3 layers to this, right? At the core is your health and wellness. And I think what's connected to that health and wellness is your spiritual well-being and your, spiritual philosophy, because your philosophy on life and your connection to God is probably the most important aspect of this, right? Because what makes us human is that we have that ability. We have the ability to have a connection with God and have a spiritual perspective or a philosophy. And that's what allows us to tap into very positive thoughts and things that are very beneficial to us from a spiritual perspective. It's like nurturing your soul. It's like spiritual vitamins, you know what I mean? Prayer is like spiritual vitamins in a sense, but means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I'm not here to tell you what that is or what's right about it. I'm just saying that that's kind of at the core of what wealth is and what success is. Once that's dialed in, the next level, of course, people want material abundance, money, wealth, opportunity, cash, and that's great. But once you get that, then there's the third level. The pinnacle of success is it's really this thing that comes out of the human potential movement, which is your persona, your character, your ethics, your behavior, you creating yourself to be somebody who is a high value person, someone who has integrity, somebody where your word actually has authority and meaning. And so, that's really kind of along the lines of what is the narrative that we're really speaking into with our media, with Legendary Life Media, with the media that we're creating, that our creators are creating. And it's really things like that are going to lead you to some level of success in those core areas. And, really it's about cutting through the noise, because there's so much noise. There's uncertainty. Where there's uncertainty, we want to bring certainty. We want to bring clarity, right? There's no certainty and clarity in the noise, right? So that's really the core. Now, I'll take a quick step back and just look at what have we done with Legendary Life Media. We launched our first print issue, so this is something that we're doing kind of on an annual basis right now, is that we're going to take our best content and our best events and the stuff that we've covered over the years, produce some print content with that. We've been covering a whole ton of events for Relentless Beats through our PR partnerships. We've been covering other local events, which is the Waste Management Open, which is happening right now in Phoenix. But really there's a big transformation coming, because what we've put out from this point, from inception to this point, was really just foundational and based on, some of the original concepts that we were going after, which was, building media partnerships, creating content. Really the vision is start bringing in content that really drives the narrative around these core areas that help people to accomplish their success in those areas, right? So this is a lot of information. I'm sure this is a lot of content. I'm going to jump back to the real estate stuff, because when I got into real estate, I got into an MLM, right? Now, a lot of people will just straight up trash MLMs and rag on them. And I get it. It's funny. It's like, I've had friends who are like Isogenics sales reps. And look, a lot of these MLMs have really great products. Isogenics they still have great products. They're just overpriced and expensive because you have to pay them, the direct marketing fees. But there are a lot of MLMs. If you have no money and have no way to start a business, MLMs are a great way to learn entrepreneurship and learn sales. So, as much as people want to rag on the MLMs, it's a really great way to network. It's a really great way to learn those skill sets. And so, whereas starting your own business could be extremely capital intensive and, take a lot more work and effort than partnering with a company, a direct sales model, because they've done all the R&D work and production and marketing and all this stuff. So, when I got into the real estate MLM, people were crazy about Landmark. They were using the Landmark tech to, beat everyone over the head with, integrity conversations. It's a workable philosophy. All these ideas and philosophies are workable to some degree, depending on who's applying it for what purpose. But then you got to ask yourself, when somebody's talking to you or coaching, you got to really understand what's their intention and what's their purpose for doing it, right? So got into real estate, but that for me was, I would go to these meetings and they would be standing there going over their deals, their flips. So I did this deal, bought this deal for this amount, put this much work into it. Here's the before picture. Here's the after picture. We made $60,000 in 3 months. And I'm like, holy shit, that's a lot of money, right? Of course, it's not that much money, especially once you're in the business. It's like, that's a good take for a deal, sure. But to somebody who has no concept of the business or hasn't done investing to that degree, it's profound. So that was kind of my foray into meeting a bunch of people who have been in the investing game for a long time, learning about real estate investing, fix and flips, wholesaling. And, of course, I've learned a lot of things over the years. So that's the story for Radical Greatness. This series, it's really going to be about radical greatness. Why? Because the only type of radical that you should be, because, being radical is not necessarily a good thing outside the context of being great, right? There's a lot of radical people online right now in a lot of different areas. And that's when it comes to creating content, you don't want to be known for that. But in my case, what I do want to be known for is I am radical in the sense of I'm radical about achieving my success. I'm radical about helping other people achieve their success. I'm battling breaking down the convention, this stuck narrative of like, existing health and the existing health system, for example, or the existing, work a 9 to 5 and, invest in a 401k till you die. These conventional ways of thinking that really have created just a miserable society. Like if you walk around, if you go outside and interact with people, people are really miserable in the public. The public is quite miserable. And I say that because you can go to a higher end neighborhood, people are very happy, right? Because they're living a great life and they probably apply a lot of principles to, accomplishing their success, and they think differently. The fact of the matter is people who are successful in these areas think differently and they act differently and they do things differently. And so the question is, what are they doing? So part of what Legendary is giving us a way to meet with people who are living these extraordinary lives and lifestyle and get a glimpse into it. And then at the same time, we want the active tools and the knowledge and the information, and how can we extrapolate what they're doing and their ways of thinking and the success that people have accomplished in tried and true proven ways, and really mold that into an actionable plan for us to accomplish our own goals and our own success and share that with other people. So that's really kind of at the core of what Legendary is about. That's really kind of what's at the core of Radical Greatness, whatever this series of conversations is. So that's that. There you have it. I think that's a good place to wrap it. Again, if you just came across this on YouTube, follow us on Instagram or TikTok. My handle is Abundance Architect, Legendary Life Media. And, on Instagram, we have a bunch of different pages. Legendary Life Motion is our health fitness page. Legendary Life Success for the self-help stuff. People are getting more and more aware of the fact that they're wasting their time on the distractions, and the distractions are wide. It's a wide gate, right? The path to destruction is wide, man. I'm telling you, you can go online and waste your time in infinite numbers of ways. Here's what I encourage you to do. If it's not what I'm saying, if you're not aligned with what I'm saying, then go find somebody who you're aligned with and follow them, listen to them, interact, right? And of course, I encourage you to create your own content. In the meantime, don't entertain time wasters. Don't entertain the doomsayers. Don't entertain mindless entertainment. Get up and get after it, because this is the time to be alive. This is the time to do something with your life. And, a lot of people aren't going to. So it's never been easier. I really think the bar's never been lower. If you want to accomplish something and really experience greatness, achieve greatness, this is the time to start doing it.